All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on unlocking on-demand access for AWS. Today is all about JIT, J-I-T, just-in-time access. I'm James Casagrande. I'll be your moderator for today. I'm from Sunray Security, also from Sunray Security, and right across the table from me, because webinar platforms don't quite figure out how to do two people in the same room, is Matt Carl, our head of product here at Sunray. Matt, how you doing?
I'm doing absolutely wonderfully.
That's excellent.
Yes.
That's excellent. So Matt's going to talk to us today all about JIT. JIT is sort of an interesting topic for us because, as I think about Sunray, and if you don't know us, by the way, we're obsessed with getting total control of permissions in your cloud. And that takes us to all these cool places in these cutting edge technologies that are new concepts around securing machine identities and doing things like permissions on demand automation, which we'll talk about. So when our customers started talking to us about JIT and, hey, can you guys, help us with just-in-time access? I was a little confused because I'm like, JIT's something I've heard about for a very long time. It's not something that's new, right? But turns out it's super important and it's something people are struggling with. And just to set the stage, right, of where JIT fits in the cloud. So this here is from our research from last year of all our typical enterprise or small to medium business cloud in AWS, and it's not groundbreaking to say, hey, you have 10 times more machine identities than you do human identities. And it's also, fortunately, not groundbreaking to say a lot of them are overprivileged and granted sensitive permissions. We track sensitive permissions as things that we've mapped to individual unique permissions. We've mapped to MITRE attack framework tactics. So for us, we live a lot in this column with the NPIs, right? And figuring out how we lock them down. And we do that with things like permissions on demand. The JIT scenario or the JIT use case is really for that human identity that has a highly privileged entry point to a highly sensitive destination. And it's something that represents a small number of identities, quote unquote, in your cloud, but is still an extremely important place to de-risk. And it's somewhere that, if you're trying to do just, some general RBAC in cloud through an identity provider or something like that, it doesn't really address this the right way, Matt. And what we've seen is JIT is sort of the remedy for people who've had this scenario of, well, I'm doing everything with groups and roles, and all of a sudden I've got this over permissioning and in basically live prod accounts with human users that I don't want.
Absolutely. Thanks, James. It's definitely been, as we've been on this wonderful journey of how do we take control of an entire cloud and really start to restrict down to a least privileged perspective all the identities in this cloud, MPIs, as well as humans. This use case has come back a number of times, which is I have parts of my cloud, Sunday, that are like so important to me that I don't want any standing privilege there. How do I actually push all of the human beings out of this environment and simply put a door that they can knock on when they want to come in, right? And this is really, it's a bit of a different use case. You absolutely have MPIs in these production environments that do their jobs day in and day out. They need to be there. Often they need really sensitive access. Generally in production environments, and this is obviously, everyone's going to laugh, like no human should ever be in a production environment. We know very well that humans do go into production environments. They do things in production environments. Should a human that has access to the most sensitive parts of your cloud have that privilege all the time? And that was the use case that really drove us to say, can we take what we're doing around permissions on demand, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means here in a minute. Can we take that and apply it to really pushing that human fully out, or all of those humans fully out, but in a very low friction, very low disruptive manner that allows them to simply come back in simply by knocking on the door.
Yeah. And the key to today we're talking about is simplicity, because if you go look in AWS documentation today, again, not a new concept, something that is addressed by them. They call it temporary elevated access for AWS accounts. But if you ask them, how do I do this, right? They point you in two different directions. They say, well, here's some old school PIM stuff you can do, or here's a GitHub repo, good luck, here's this team thing, do it yourself. And for, that's not obviously that's led to a lot of struggles for a lot of people. It just seems like we encounter people who are in two buckets. Number one, they're scoping a ton of resources to try and get a JIT project going. Or number two, they know they have to do it. They know it's super important, and they're just completely daunted by the effort. So it's just sitting on the shelf, and it's just something they're never getting to. So why does it seem this has been a best practice for so long? Why is it so hard to get implemented today in AWS?
JIT, and anybody here who has spent any time in the pre-cloud world, we're very familiar with JIT. JIT is something that's been around forever. Were we looking to build another great big enterprise JIT solution? No. We were looking to build a cloud native JIT solution that addressed all the pain points for these customers. I have this legacy tool, this big PAM. I'm trying to use it to do JIT into my cloud environment. Now I'm dealing with things like bastion hosting and proxying and all of this. Now it's another infrastructure for my cloud team to manage, or some team to manage, just to give me back that access. JIT traditionally has been quite hard in AWS, which is why most of our customers that we work with actually have not actually accomplished it. I had one customer do it where it's like, yeah, we're trying to get this tool in. We've allocated 6-month project to get JIT into our AWS environment to alleviate the admin access. It's hard. And these are agent-based solutions or big infrastructural solutions that require care and feeding. And not only that, you're actually managing these solutions. They become something you have to manage.
Right.
When in reality, you're doing this today, you're moving people in and out of this environment. Is there not a better way?
Right. Yeah. And speaking of it just being another thing to manage, right? Let's talk about solutions, because it seems like one of the big issues is we have this extensive IAM infrastructure in AWS. Yes, it can drive people a little crazy, but it's really powerful. It's all sitting there, and yet the answer to JIT so far has been, let's wrap another identity layer on top of this. And then the other thing, which a phrase I'm going to steal your thunder, phrase I love that you use is meeting your people where you are, is when you put that new layer on there, instead of saying, yeah, hey, keep doing what you're doing, you're now asking them to go somewhere else. So to me, there's these two things that need to change. It's just the infrastructure of do the hard work of leveraging the AWS IAM stuff that you have today, and then try and find how are you people getting into how are people working today, and can you just integrate JIT into that process? So talk us through this and how you think about what the changes need to be.
So when we looked at this problem, I've said it before, people move around these clouds every day, right? You SSO into your environment, you get your authentication through that layer. You then, you move through your IDP integrated with Identity Center, and you you're authorized into an account. And once I'm there, I can do certain things. This happens day in and day out in most, I would almost guess 100% of the customers on this call today, their clouds, this is how it works, right? This is how we get access to a cloud. When we looked at this, we applied the same mentality as we have with the entire firewall. It's about how do we step in, but in the least disruptive manner possible, to take control of this environment and return central control to the cloud teams that own it. And JIT was no different. People are busy. They have existing policies, procedures, behaviors. People have patterns in the way they work. How can we step in and simply say, the next time you try to get into that most sensitive part of the cloud, the only thing that changes for you, Mr. DevOps engineer, Mr. Cloud SecOps engineer, is you'll have to knock on the door, a simple yes or no in a Slack message, and then you're in. None of this, I need different permission sets defined in a different tool that I manage. None of this, I need proxying servers to actually get into these environments. We need tools that actually are built for cloud, not legacy tools that have migrated forward and try to bring that infrastructure along to solve this problem.
Right. All right. Well, now, Matt, I'd love it if you could walk us through a little bit of what we're going to see. We're going to look at some JIT. We're also JIT in context of managing permissions. We have a couple different ways to do it in the firewall. I mentioned permissions on demand is another, for those of you who are not familiar, another sort of JIT-esque sort of way to manage things. But
I'm trying to solve there we go. Now I'm allowed to share.
Oh, sorry.
James
I was sharing
the window. I'm going to click over here. You guys are going to get the infinite share window here for a second, and then we'll jump over here. We all looking good?
Looks good to me.
Everything looks wonderful. All right, I'm going to take everyone for a quick little tour. Obviously, the Cloud Permissions Firewall, what's our goal? Total control of permissions and access in the cloud, right? And so JIT was an extension of the journey we've been on with our great customers. How do we actually tackle this problem at scale, at scope, across these very large or smallish AWS estates, right? So how do we plug in and really give back control? I'm going to go through quickly the use cases along the top because these are all access problems, right? We actually absolutely do have regional-based aspects of the firewall. That's how I can control, where you, Mr. Customer, are allowed to do things in your cloud. The firewall will ensure that you can come and go from the appropriate parts of your world. Third parties, this has been an amazing journey for us with our customers, which is exposing which third parties exist in your environment. It's always quite shocking. I'll show you that here. It's usually quite interesting for customers when they see this for the first time in their world and they see all of these third parties, meaning other entities that could be vendors, they could be partners that can come and go from this cloud. And they start to see things like never or 2 years ago against these organizations that get access to the cloud. Again, all access problems as we go through this. From a least privilege perspective, certainly we tackle the service landscape in AWS and locking it down. And I will get to JIT, trust me. Zombies, all of those identities that exist in your world that do nothing at all. I have seen this number in many clouds be in the 20, 30, 40, 50,000 identities that don't do anything. How do we grasp, take control of those and actually control them? And that's a permission unbanned use case for us. How do I bring one back if I need it, right? How do I take control without breaking? That's another big thing for us. What we do is in addition to what you do in your cloud, we supply a secondary set of controls that work in concert with yours to strip away these permissions. And JIT is also the same way, which makes it very low friction, very easy to deploy, and very low disruption to whatever goes on in your world today. And then obviously we are going to talk about this overprivileged users and users that have more, or identities that have more access than they need. And what happens when we strip away that access, but we want to give it back. We call that permissions on demand, but you can also think of that as service and account fidelity JIT. James absolutely needs to do the most sensitive things to EC2 right now, and we've restricted him from those, but with a click of a button, he can get those back, get his job done, and we'll strip those off. But we're here today primarily to talk about JIT. So I am going to, for those of you that are existing customers, you're very familiar with this experience. For the new customers here, obviously what we're looking at is this just-in-time capability that we've added most recently. Here at Sunray, we really believe that our capabilities and our solutions work in concert with your cloud. We're not here to give you a wildly different experience about looking at your world than you already have. So we're very, very used to, and we're very fond of showing you your cloud. You can see it here. Our JIT solution is unique in that, again, I mentioned it before, you do this today. Your people move through your environment today. This terminology around permission sets shouldn't be foreign to anybody here who's using Identity Center and an IDP, right? That's the portal through which you define what can identities do when they enter my world. I would suspect most customers power user access, and then you'll customize from there. But as I mentioned, meet you where you are. Our goal was to come into this environment and allow you to start to take control of humans in either very specific places or broadly, right? With 1 or 2 clicks of a button, I can take all administrator access out of this cloud simply by enrolling this one permission set across the entirety of this cloud. And of course, I decided to do this live, and so now we're waiting for there we go. Everybody, live demo. So if things go, slightly squirrely, that's on me. So simple, 2 clicks of a button, all administrator access in this world is now controlled, right? Why is that important? Administrator access, you give a human being 2 paths, read-only administrator, they're going to pick administrator all the time. This is a beautiful way of simply stating, you worked yesterday in one way. Tomorrow, you can work exactly the same way. But if you enter that world and you pick administrator access, you're going to hear from us. And all we're going to say is, hey, we noticed you're trying to get into that account using administrator access. Are you sure you want to be doing that? Yes or no? And if the answer is yes, and you give a good enough reason, the approver will get that. They'll make the approval. 6 seconds later, you're off to the races. And when I say that, what does that actually look like? So we're going to actually go through this live. I'm going to show you. I'm not going to deploy this control, but you'll see here. I'm going to play in this production area where I've absolutely enrolled administrator access and power user access. And that's this in our MyHealth production data account. And I think I've shared my whole screen so you guys can see everything I do here. So I'm actually going to log in, and you're going to see the first phase of what does it look like to interact with the Sunray JIT solution. I'll show you 2 different mechanisms that can happen here. Everyone would be very familiar with this screen. right? This is what happens when you log the AWS console, but why is it all red, right? Well, it's all red because we've actually started to interact with the human that's doing this. And so this is when I say low friction. All we've done is use the same platform you already have for interacting with your users, which is Slack, Teams, email, and we've reached out. And you'll see here, we're actually starting to figure out who are we dealing with? Well, this is Matthew, so Sunray's coming to me. And it's saying you're trying to go into my health using administrator access. Do you wish to ask for approval? Now, I will say here, the firewall has a couple of interesting configurations you can make. You can absolutely have self-approval. If you have areas of your cloud where people will come and go and you want them to approve their own access, it's very important to, again, low friction, low management. If they're allowed to approve their own work, let them approve their own work. We're not here to disrupt, we're here to secure, right? So in this case, I'm showing you a self-approval. We also have easy configurations where you simply state it's not a self-approval, it's actually other entities are required. And if that's the case, this would be a justification. We'll send this approval off. We'll get a yes or no answer to it in about 6 seconds. You're off to the races. So I'm going to say yes. I need this for an hour. I am doing an amazing webinar on JIT, and we're going to hit approve. And so what you're going to see is the firewall immediately has recognized that Matt's approved this, right? Are there other ways? So what you saw, I like to call the reactive flow. A user has tried to do something and we're reaching out because we've noticed you're trying to do something that's not allowed right now, right? Are there other ways? There are absolutely other ways. I can show you very quickly. You could easily as well drop to Slack and simply ask, I want access. I need to go into production and I need to use the admin access path and I need it for 8 hours and I'm going in to do some work. Right, and here's my actual justification or reference number. This could be your Jira ticket, your ServiceNow ticket, and then I hit request, and all that does is kick off the same flow you just saw, except for in this case, it would go to the approver to say yes or no. Right, so this is asking for permission rather than asking for forgiveness. Right. Now, if we go back to AWS and simply refresh, what you'll see here is now my console lights up. My access has been granted. I'm now into AWS. Right, and I am actually full administrator. You can see it up here. I got full admin access. Now, I did want to touch a little bit on permissions on demand. It's an important aspect of the firewall, and it really does align with the just-in-time topic. And so if we look at that, we're going to play a Bedrock. And I'll bring up Bedrock over here. And I got this beautiful little agent that we've built to play around. Oh, go ahead, James.
Yeah, no, maybe we clarify for people who don't know. So permissions on demand is a concept we like to think we came up with, but but it's something that is like JIT, right? In that it's a workflow-based, approval-based way to handle sometimes permanent access, but also temporal access. And built really for not just humans, but really for machine identities.
Absolutely. With part of the firewall's goal is to but really govern who or what has the most sensitive action in your cloud. I'm sorry, I know I have to lean forward to pick up the mic, so I apologize. When we came up with permissions on demand, it was how do we handle any of these requests that are happening by identities when they bump into a firewall control? I've restricted all access to EC2 from a sensitive perspective in my production world. But wait, this new identity that we're pushing in there now needs to create internet gateways. It now needs to update security groups, or I as a human need to update security groups. How do we give that back? We would do that through permissions on demand. And it looks very similar. James is trying to do really sensitive things to EC2. Do you want to let it happen? Yes or no? So think of JIT as a much bigger hammer directly focused at humans to say, not only are we going to remove your most sensitive capabilities, we're actually going to push you right out of this account. And we're going to put a door at the front of the account and you knock on it to get in. So what I just showed you there through Slack was a really simple, I just got JIT access to this account. I had all of my access stripped. I had absolutely zero standing privilege in this account. And through one Slack message, I now have it back. What I'm going to show you now is a little bit, what does it mean to sort of JIT a non-human? You have these in your world all the time. These identities do things day in and day out. But what if they start to color outside the lines, right? What if something happens in one of these services in AWS that you didn't expect? What if a non-human identity tries to take an action that you truly were not expecting and in fact could be a risk to you or your cloud, right? So I have this beautiful little bot we created. It's my Health Bedrock agent. And I'm just going to play with it for a second. Can you tell me about yourself? And so, like all great AI solutions, this takes a little bit of a minute or two for it to actually figure out how it wants to answer. Look, I'm an AI assistant focused on helping with AWS-related queries and tasks. Well, that's fantastic. And yes, this is contrived, but I'm gonna show you how this all sort of comes together. That's great. Can you tell me about my S3 buckets? And so the same thing, what this agent is doing is it's using a piece of compute, which in this case is a Lambda function that's making calls on my behalf using Bedrock to actually orchestrate calls into my cloud and out of my cloud. And so you can see, I mean, just like that, it was able to tell me what S3 buckets I have. I can actually use this bot to describe this entire account, what networks are here, what S3 buckets are here, what users are here. But now what if I, as an individual, decided to do something I should not? Right? What if I figure out that I have this interesting capability? I have access to this MPI in this world. This MPI is tied to core identities in AWS that have permissions at the IAM level, right? Obviously, it can do S3 queries, right? We just proved that. What if I ask it, can you make me a VPC with a CIDR of 10.0.0.0/24, right? And I hit enter. Now, obviously, this is not something we would want to happen in our world. Generally, we would not be exposing Bedrock agents or AI agents to this level of permission in my world so that it can do these types of activities. And now you'll see the reaction, right? We were able to query S3 buckets, but I apologize, I don't have access to do what you just asked me. Now, if I come back over here, what's interesting here is very much like the JIT scenario. Now I'm dealing with a very similar engagement, but of a non-human. And you can see it. It just happens to be a Bedrock execution agent. And it happens to be in my health productions account, and it's trying to create a VPC. Now, I am absolutely not going to hit yes, right? This is absolutely not something I would permit, but this shows you the power of that sort of JIT infrastructure when we start wrapping services or wrapping identities specifically, in addition to whole humans and pushing humans out of these environments, right? I'm going to hit deny on that. And I'll just wrap the story up by what does it look like? Some things that we do get asked about when we start talking about JIT is things like, okay, people are coming and going in these environments. They're accessing these environments. They're doing things in these environments. Can I understand what's going on? And so we absolutely do, because we're moderating these sessions in and out of your environment. Obviously, we can see every single session that happens. And I know that Matt's in here, and I know he's in this account. I know this is how he got in. He was in there, started 7 minutes ago. He's got 53 minutes remaining. I can absolutely terminate this session, right? Easy peasy. That's about 6 seconds. If I hit that button, that session dies on the vine. Everything that's going on inside that account terminates. Now, that's interesting. Now, what did Matt do? Right? This is a common question we get. I have these identities working in my environment, specifically humans in this case. I told James that he could absolutely go into production. He was working on a ticket for us. He was updating security groups so that we get access to networks. What did he do? I can go to any one of these sessions and immediately get an understanding of what occurred. And a lot of these sessions have tens of thousands of CloudTrail events associated to them. But what we're doing is pulling these back and actually sifting through them and giving, in this case, the approver, a really good understanding of the activities that occurred. And moreover, what's really interesting is we send these via Slack to the approvers that approve these sessions. So I let James go in. James did his work. When James's session was over, I get this beautiful Slack that said, yes, James updated the security groups he was supposed to. James also deleted 3 RDS instances. James also created 3 pieces of compute in that environment. And James also opened an external portal in that environment. And you can't hide from it. It's in the cloud. We see the data. We will aggregate it up and we will send that human readable summary.
So as the approver, this whole process could just be in Slack for me. Everything you just showed, basically.
Absolutely. Most of our users spend very little time in the actual firewall UI. That was the whole goal here, was low friction and very low change to any process that you have. Your DevOps teams, most employees in an organization use a Slack, a Teams, one of these chat platforms. Their interactions are almost exclusively through there. This will get hand delivered to the approver of this session. The request to get access was delivered to the approver in Slack. The request to do the action was done through Slack. I'm just using the UI to give you an idea of the actual capabilities.
Gotcha.
And so I want to wrap it there, leave us a few minutes for questions. That's JIT in a nutshell through the Cloud Permissions Firewall. The things I want you to really take home with this is meeting you where you are. Your teams do this today with Identity Center. All we're doing is plugging into Identity Center and doing a deep integration to really start to lock down parts of your world. I'm not asking you to give me access to your IDP. I'm not asking you to allow me to move users around. I'm not asking you to go into my solution and build out permission sets that we own and maintain and manage on your behalf. You do all this today. This is really about plugging in and really dovetailing into an existing process and doing nothing more than injecting a simple request and approval flow. Right. And obviously we record it all the audit data is available for every single transaction or interaction that you've seen me do with the firewall. That can be certainly sifted off to a platform for monitoring, but certainly everything that's ever done through this platform is absolutely audited. Awesome.
Thank you, Matt.
No problem.
I'll take the share back.
I'm going to stop sharing.
Beautiful. All right. That was our look at JIT. Just to reiterate, right, of the whole story of the permissions firewall. So we really focused on the end side of this process of, how do we handle on-demand access? And that's what we focus on today, JIT and permissions on demand. There's this whole world of this default deny here in the middle where, firewall is managing SCPs and RCPs in your environment to set up these blocks that then the permissions on demand workflows interact with. So there's this entire world of just making sure that you're locking down these unused accesses, these unused assets in your cloud, and removing things like, and doing things a little bit differently, like, hey, we're not going to remove unused identities, we're going to quarantine them, right? So because everything that's done in this default deny box is done with an eye towards how do we make sure we don't break workloads for developers or piss developers off and make this sustainable. Because you see something like default deny and it sounds like a security tool that's going to get in the way. Yeah. And so that's why things are a little bit different. If you want to see more about that, and you're new to Sunry, definitely reach out to us. Would love to jump more into that. But the idea is let's figure out how to control access for people, for machines, and for third parties. We do it a little bit differently for each one, but we think we can successfully do it by using JIT, locking down third parties by using a default deny there, using services and regions as a control point to just turn them off. That's literally the best way I could describe it, is it's an off button for services and regions, and quarantining unused identities, and then restricting those sensitive permissions, right, that are not used either, and making sure we focus on the risk that's the most important to us and the stuff that we can actually get to least privilege quickly, rather than editing thousands of IAM policies or whatever the hell we've been trying to do, right, as a cloud community for the last 10 years. So that's the goal, make it, can we do it fast? Can we do it in a realistic way and reduce them in a sustainable way that's going to allow us to keep developing from here on out? So that's the firewall. Matt, thank you so much for that presentation.
Absolutely.
From here on out, we got time for a couple questions. I think one came in, and I hope I'm not quite sure how this one means, but how does permissions on demand work for system or automation accounts?
Oh, it's a great question. So we have many accounts in clouds that we see. They could be CI/CD pipeline pushing identities, terraforming identities, anything like that. So we obviously have numbers of NPIs that have a responsibility to both create that environment or operate within that environment. When the firewall onboards, the first thing it does is basically profile the entirety of that estate, and it understands every single thing that is going on, every permission that exists, every permission that's used. And the firewall will never take an action on an identity without first providing the users, the administrators of the firewall, the understanding of what identities do require the most sensitive access in my world, and lock the environment to match that usage. Mm-hmm. And so we do not disrupt service accounts because they have a pattern of behavior. We match their behavior, and we therefore allow them to do what they need to do. We obviously have what I would call the get out of jail free capabilities, where you can absolutely say any identity that matches this pattern, never touch it. And if you do that, we will absolutely never touch it. But many of our users use it day in and day out by not doing those grand sort of break glass style exceptions. In fact, it's just simply service accounts have a very static behavior that they tend to follow. We will match that behavior. And if they start to deviate, that's when you will start to hear from us. So generally, very little to no disruption of any service account in your world. And then you will hear from the firewall if that service account changes behavior, if somebody gets their hands on it, starts to do something they shouldn't.
Got it.
Yeah.
There's a couple questions that basically I would describe as coverage. Can you do JIT for X, right? Particularly one about, can you do it for Azure or GCP? I would say we're a cloud company. We definitely, anything we do in the future will be focused on cloud. JIT, as it just came out, is for AWS. But But for things like Azure or GCP, I mean, we're always looking at that, and
Absolutely.
might be something in the future. Definitely, we have covered Azure and GCP in the past. So, but yeah, we are 100. Just to be clear, 100% focused on cloud. We're kind of myopic on just making sure that's secure.
I think Andrew's question is amazing. Can I answer Andrew's
Yeah,
question?
go ahead.
So Andrew's question, for those who haven't read the chat, is without getting into secret sauce, how do you do what you do, basically? I should have mentioned it early on. We use 100% cloud native controls to do what we do. And that's important. The cloud, AWS in particular, has a beautiful set of control plane capabilities that are magical and are scary. And so what we're doing is taking the scariness out of it by automating it with your own data. And so yes, we use SCPs. Yes, we use RCPs. We do use aspects of ABAC. We do deep integration with identity center through other mechanisms. So everything we're doing, AWS has provided the capabilities to do, the tools, if you will, or the ingredients in the recipe, if you will. But what we're doing is really preparing the meal. So we're taking all of those ingredients and putting them together to produce something that orchestrates all of that for you and reaches out, talks to you, gets your responses, and makes that your reality very, very quickly. So, Andrew, to your point, we use almost everything you've mentioned there in some way, shape, or form to accomplish this. RCPs, obviously being the new one on the new kid on the block. AWS launched this back in November. That really helps around third-party controls and how do you handle access from outside of your organization into your organization. We make that a brick wall as well, if you want it.
Yeah. If you're not familiar with RCPs, we actually worked with AWS on developing them, and we have a ton of resources around them in our website. And it's really cool what they've enabled us to do.
Absolutely.
Another question, as I understand it, JIT abstracts the IAM policies permission overhead to allow deny with the click of a button. If so, what instrumentation is required? I think that's.
You're gonna have to read that to me again.
Yeah. So JIT abstracts IAM policies and permissions overhead to a simple allow deny with a click of the button. What instrumentation is required to get there? I think that's
actually very low for JIT in particular. Your teams, whoever manages your identity center infrastructure will have defined permission sets, both current and in the future. By the way, we handle in the future ones as well. Without having to disrupt you. If new ones that come into existence, we will capture them and control them. That infrastructure, it stays and is managed the exact same way as you always would have managed it. Simply plugging us in and saying, I want to take control of this permission set at this scope is the only question that needs, or the only activity that needs to happen. 2 clicks of a button, I can take out an entire permission set or control the whole permission set across the entirety of your AWS estate, whether it's 2 accounts or 1,000 accounts. Right? It's that simple. And so, again, very important to meet you where you are. People are doing this today. They're managing those permission sets. They're managing group membership and association of permission sets. We simply step in at the very last minute. And when I come through that permission set into that account, you're knocking on the door. And that door is our deep integration with Identity Center. And at that point, yes or no, you're in or you're out.
Got it. Would this require root access? Scary question.
We don't know. It's a great question. Actually, hey, I have a SaaS that's doing identity things in my world. Everything, and I should have shown it when we went through, everything we do in Sunray, especially around things like controlling services and disabling services and JIT configurations, are a 2-stage deploy mechanism. You tell us what you want your world to be. You declare what your world should be. And once you make that declaration and you say, I want to deploy that control plane, at that point, we hand off actually to somebody in your team or to a pipeline that's responsible for deploying infrastructure. Either of those are possible. But think about, I have a cloud SecOps team or a cloud ops team that's responsible for ensuring that my SCPs are correct, and they're responsible for doing all those types of deploys. No problem. We bundle up an IAC bundle, we hand it to them, 2 clicks of a button, they deploy it into AWS, and at that point, we gain the access that we need. We use very, obviously not benign because we can change things in the cloud a little bit, but we have heavily curated access to that cloud to do the actions that we do. And we absolutely do not require, we can't write an SCP, we can't deploy an SCP, we can't do any of those types of behaviors. We just have very specific permissions that allow us to swizzle our controls on or off. So no root access here, none.
Gotcha. I don't want to sign you up for any development here. There's some questions about basically extensibility and do you have an API where we could bring this to sort of a unified JIT somewhere else, for other systems? I think that's sure.
It's always on the radar. We're always looking at should we go other places? What I can say is we have many, many, many AWS customers, and many, many AWS customers needed a JIT solution. So that was our focus. We have GCP customers that want GCP JIT. We have Azure customers who want an easier Azure JIT. And so those are our focuses right now. The public cloud ecosystems provide enough focus for us at the moment, and that's where we will be continuing for at least in the short term.
Gotcha. Yeah, a lot of questions around that. I'm glad people want to bring it other places, but yeah, talk to us. But as long as it's cloud, we're willing to listen. Other questions? We got anything else? I think we got most of them. There's a question about assume privilege mechanism. What JIT adds to AWS IAM with assume privilege? I'm not sure which that one means.
Which word is that?
It's Ilya asked this question early on.
Ilya, what JIT adds to AWS IAM to assume privilege mechanism? Great question. So the way AWS and Identity Center work, I'm sure those who are really deep into this know assume role with web identity, assume role with SAML, there are all these capabilities that allow AWS roles and accounts to be assumed by outside entities. In AWS Identity Center's case, it's assume role with SAML. We absolutely do, for your perspective, we absolutely do engage in that exact step. That's absolutely where we jump into this. We are swizzling a few things on our side to react to those types of behaviors when we see them in the cloud. And so prior to us getting involved, those identities on that account side are completely locked with default and nine-star, exactly as you'd expect in AWS if you want to strip all the permissions off of something. And then what we do is we step in, as you mentioned here in the AWS assume role flow, to absolutely swizzle things around to make it okay. That is one thing that's important. You saw me at the very first step enroll admin access across that entire cloud. I should have said this way back then. Simply enrolling admin access across the entirety of that cloud does not mean if I JIT into admin access, I'm now in the entire cloud. The fidelity of a JIT session is always permission set, user, account. And so just because I let you in through administrator access into account A does not mean you can use that same permission or capability or approval to get into account B. You would require a secondary JIT to get into that part of the world, right? So it allows us to also separate humans from each other. Ilya going into account A through a JIT session does not mean everybody else in administrator access can get in there. If James tries to come in right behind in the same permission set, same account, he has to knock on the door as well.
Got it. Last question. Customers want to know, can we use this today? How do we get into using JIT?
Absolutely. We launched about 2 weeks ago. It's pretty much wide open now for any of the existing customers that we have. It's available in the UIs. So you can log in today and start configuring and manipulating and using JIT to your heart's content. Again, Slack team support available. So
nice.
Off to the races.
Great.
Amazing.
Those are all our questions.
That's spectacular.
If you guys have more questions, please email us. We will get to you as quickly as we can. But thank you so much for all the questions. Thanks for joining us. For those of you who are not customers, we do offer a free trial, 14 days, no questions asked. Get your own tenant. We'll get you set up there pretty quickly. And we like to say within just a couple hours, you can start seeing results. So please hit our website, sunray.com/trial. And that's it. Matt,
Amazing.
Thank you so much. I'm glad our one laptop, two people in a room webinar seems to have worked.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
Have a great one.